Hello Year 7s and welcome back to Maths. In today's Maths lesson we're going to be learning about how to add fractions. So you all know how to add whole numbers, and I'm sure that you've all done adding fractions in primary school as well, but this is going to be a good refresher. And yeah, just a recap, so far with fractions we've introduced the different types of fractions, mixed numbers, proper fractions and improper fractions. We have done equivalent fractions, simplified fractions, mixed numbers, we've ordered fractions in ascending and descending order, and today we're learning how to add. Next week we'll learn how to subtract as well. And then later on we'll learn how to multiply and divide. So we'll be doing all the 4 operations, but instead of whole numbers, with fractions this time. Okay, let's get into it. 4E, adding fractions. Okay, so if you have a look at this top example here, fractions with the same denominator can be added very easily. Okay, so denominator is down. So if we have a look here, the denominator in both of these fractions is 8. So we've got 3 over 8 plus 2 over 8, and we can easily just add these two fractions because all you have to do is add the numerators. So all you have to do is add 3 and 2 to get 5 over 8. These diagrams are to show it very well. You can imagine that the circle is a pizza or a pie. So you've got 3 pieces here, 2 pieces here, which means that altogether you've got 5 pieces. Okay, so that's really easy when the fractions have the same denominator, but sometimes, or more often than not, they don't have the same denominator. Adding fractions without the same denominator is not as easy. So if we have a look at this bottom example here, the denominator here is 3, and this one is 4. So they're different now. And if we have a look at the diagrams, so I've got 1/3 here, 1/4 here, and then if I'm trying to add them together and see how many pieces I have in total, it's a big question mark. It's not very easy to figure out, but it is possible, and we're going to learn how to do that right now. Okay, so before I tell you how to do it, or before I step through it with you, I just want you to have a think about these pairs of numbers here. So we've got, so look horizontally, so that's one pair there, that's one pair there. So 6 goals and 4 goals, is that easy to add, or is it easier to add 6 hours and 3 days, or 21 seconds and 4 minutes? I want you to pause this video and have a think about these examples. Which one's the easiest to add together and why? Okay, good. So hopefully you realize that it's much easier to add 4 goals and 6 goals compared to if you've got 4 hours and 3 days or 21 seconds and 4 minutes. And the reason is, the first example, 4 goals and 6 goals, they're both in the same units. They're both in the units of goals. However, in the following examples, you've got 6 hours and 3 days. That's 2 different units, and it's a lot harder to add them. All right. And this is the exact same principle when we look at fractions. So with fractions, when you have 2 fractions with the same denominator, pretty easy to add them. 2 plus 3 gives you 5 over 7, just like what we did on the previous slide. But then when the denominators are different, like here we've got 1 over 4 and 2 over 9. Now again, like what we had here with the hours and the days, it's like the same thing as if you have 2 different units. In this case, we've got 2 different denominators, so we have to change them to make it possible to add them. Okay, so to add fractions with different denominators, we need to convert them to fractions with the same lowest common denominator. So in this topic, you will realize that a lot of the knowledge from the previous topic, number patterns and properties, like HCF, highest common factor, and lowest common denominator, they're all coming back because everything is connected in maths, okay? Everything builds on another. So it's not like, oh, we learnt about lowest common denominator a few weeks ago, I don't have to remember it anymore. Yes, you do. It's coming back. It's still relevant. It's still needed for fractions. Okay, so if you follow the next few steps when you're adding fractions with a different denominator, you can't go wrong. The first step is you need to find what is the lowest common denominator of the 2 fractions or however many fractions you have. Convert the fractions that you have to fractions with the same lowest common denominator, and then add the fraction. So when you're going to do that, the denominator will already be the same, but you'll be able to add the numerators to find the final result. Let's go through an example, it will make much more sense. 2 over 5 plus 1 over 3, or 1/3. Okay, so as we can see, the denominators are different. We've got fifths and thirds. Okay, so we need to change them, and we're going to change them into the lowest common denominator. So the first step is find the lowest common denominator of 5 and 3. So to do that, you need to find the lowest common multiple. Okay, so there's a few ways you can do this. Number one, you could go 5 times 3, that gives you 15. Just to double check, we could write out some multiples of 5, so 5, 10, 15, 20, and multiples of 3 include 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, okay? And then compare your list, see which numbers are in common and which number is the lowest value that is in common to both, and that is 15, which is the same as 5 times 3. So very often, or sometimes, you can find the lowest common multiple by simply multiplying the two denominators together. So it works in this case. It won't always work though. Alright. Okay, step 2 says add to the fractions, convert the fractions to fractions with the same lowest common denominator. I'm gonna put my face up there, that's better. Okay, so step 2. I'll start with 2/5. So I want to write 2/5 as something over 15. So to do that, you have to think 5 times what gives you 15. Or you can think of it as 15 divided by 5 gives me 3. But whatever you do to the bottom of the fraction, you must do to the top. So if I'm going to multiply the denominator by 3, I must also multiply the numerator by 3. That gives me 2 times 3, which is 6. So 2 over 5, an equivalent fraction to that, a fraction that means the same thing but with different numbers, is 6 over 15. Now I need to do the same thing for my second fraction, 1 over 3. So I want to write 1 over 3 as something over 15. 3 times something gives me 15. So to figure out that something, you go 15 divided by 3, that gives you 5. And whatever you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So I've got 1 at the top already, and I need to multiply that by 5 as well. So that'll give me 5 over 15. Okay, step 3, add the fractions. Okay, now to add the fractions, all I need to do is, I've got 6 over 15 plus 5 over 15. As it says here, the denominator stays the same, so my 15 will remain constant, but I'm going to add the numerators, so 6 plus 5, and that gives me 11 over 15. And that is the final answer, 11 over 15. Okay, so just to recap, I found the lowest common multiple between 5 and 3, which was 15. I then wrote both fractions as a fraction over 15, and then step 3 was to add them. All I had to do was add the numerators, the denominator just remained as 15. Okay, let's try 2 more examples together, and then it is your turn to practice. Guys, with fractions, it's all about practice. The more practice you do, the more questions you do, the easier it becomes, and the more confident you become as well. It's not about speed. I don't want you to rush through them. It's about making sure you're doing it properly and getting as much practice in as possible. Okay, let's start with B. 3 over 4 plus 5 over 6. Okay, so the first step is to find the lowest common denominator, or the lowest common multiple between 4 and 6. Lowest common multiple of 4 and 6. So sometimes you can multiply the numbers, so 4 times 6 gives you 24. But let me show you something. If I were to actually write out all of the multiples of 4 and all of the multiples of 6, well, not all of them, but some of them, and then try and compare them and see which number is in common and which one's the lowest number that's in common to both, that's not actually 24. There's actually a number that's lower than that, that they both that are multiples of both 4 and 6, and that's actually 12. So this is one example of where sometimes if you multiply the two denominators together, it won't actually give you the lowest common multiple. it will give you 24, but the lowest common multiple is actually 12. It's actually no big deal if you actually just went ahead with 24, but your numbers would all be bigger. So potentially the adding, not potentially, all of the rest of the steps would be harder, but it wouldn't be wrong. Okay, so let's use 12. Now what I have to do is I have to write each fraction as a fraction over 12, so find equivalent fractions. So 3 over 4, I want to write this as something over 12. So 4 times something will give me 12. So 12 divided by 4 is 3, that something is 3. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. Okay, 3 times 3 is 9. So 3 over 4 can also be written as 9 over 12. 5 over 6, I'm going to do the same thing for the other fraction. I want to write it as something over 12. Okay, to do this, 6 times something gives you 12. So 12 divided by 6 is 2. Whatever you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So 5 times 2 is 10. So I've got my two fractions now. They're both written as something over 12. Now I can do step 3, which is to add them. So 9 over 12 plus 10 over 12 gives you 19 over 12. That is an improper fraction because the numerator on top is actually greater than the denominator on the bottom. So what we need to do is we usually don't like to write fractions as improper fractions because it's not normal to have the numerator higher than the greater than the denominator. So we're going to convert that into a mixed fraction. So to do that, you can break it up 12 into 12 over 12 and 7 over 12 because 12 plus 7 gives you 19. 12 over 12 is the same as 1, so you've got 1 and 7 twelfths. Some of you might be able to skip this middle step. Okay, and that's your answer. So 3 over 4 plus 5 over 6 gives you 1 and 7 twelfths. Okay, so it is a bit of a long process, guys, but like I said, the more practice you do, the easier it will get for you. One last example, guys. Let's do C. Okay, so this one, I'm going to show you a different method that you can use because now we've got two mixed numbers because there's whole parts and fraction parts. A method that I'm not sure what primary school teachers teach these days, but one method that you can use is you can actually deal with the whole numbers and the fraction parts separately. So if I were to gather all the whole parts, that's 2 and 1. And then I've got my fraction parts, 1 over 10 and 3 over 4. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So now all I have to deal with is my fraction parts. And that's just the same as what I was doing before. So if I were to do that over here, 1 over 10 plus 3 over 4. The lowest common multiple is actually 20. Okay, so you could do 10 times 4, which is 40, but if you went through the multiples of 4 and the multiples of 10, you'd realize that the lowest common multiple is actually 20. So if I were to write 1 over 10 as something over 20, it would be 2 over 20, and 3 over 4 would be 15 over 20. And then I could add those two together. Sorry, it's getting a bit messy. Two over 20 plus 15 over 20 gives you 17 over 20. Okay, so I've got 3 plus 17 over 20, otherwise known as 3 and 17 over 20. All right, thank you, Year 7s. I hope that was useful. Please remember that the personal trainer is available on Cambridge Go if you want to watch some more video examples or do some walkthroughs before you attempt your questions. I will post up which questions you should be doing, but everyone should have this stuck into their books as well. And you're doing 4E adding fractions. Thank you.